Okay, welcome. Glad you're here today. My name's Ross Ford. I am a lifelong contractor. Now I am an advocate for homeowners and how to get things more affordable and how to make them work. So today I'm here with Jolene Ford, who is also my wife, and Ashley Call, who is my daughter. So we're going to talk a little bit today about stormwater. And I guess real quick, Jolene, you first. What qualifies you to be in this conversation with me today?
I feel like our entire married life we've been doing construction, and I've been the one that handles all the money, and so I job cost things, and I'm very aware of every little cost that comes into a home, and if it's of a benefit to the home.
Okay, same question to you, Ashley.
I don't think anything. I'm a homeowner and I want a home, and I currently own a home but would like a better one in the future, and want to know how that can happen and what the builders, to know I'm getting a good builder that's following laws.
So I guess what I want to throw out to you guys is what I see from my position is that what we do with water quality is more of a paperwork exercise, not an actual water quality exercise. So kind of the question becomes, does doing a lot of paperwork improve the water quality? Does that somehow help? Is having to make sure that all the paperwork's done and tracked and everybody can see what happened and what is happening? Is there a benefit to that?
Is the paperwork tracking action, or is the paperwork just paperwork for the sake of paperwork?
Well, it's government, so it's paperwork for the sake of paperwork, in my opinion. But I guess maybe that's kind of the conversation we're going to have. So what I see part of the problem too is there's certain paperwork requirements that are handed down from the federal level through the state to the cities. For the builders, when they get it out on the job, they have a huge problem.
So wait, if it's coming from the federal level, does that mean every state has the same water requirements regardless of rain amount and just generic ecosystem?
Well, you think it wouldn't be that way, right? Because we're super dry and other places are
Yeah.
super wet. But yeah, to a point it is. They have a set standard and it comes down. Now, there is some ability to change it a little bit. We don't do a lot of that in Utah. We kind of go with that federal standard, which becomes part of the problem. That's part of what we see as waste, is because now we're doing things to protect our environment from stormwater, assuming we're getting many, many times more inches of rain per year than we get.
So do those requirements change based on how the property sits? Because I would imagine a property sitting way up on a hill when the rain comes is going to have a much different effect than a property that maybe sits down in a gully, and when it rains it kind of just stays there. It's not going to go anywhere.
No, so that is specifically one of the problems. So one of the things I kind of wanted to talk about, it should. So when we look at the stormwater, the overall concept, what we want to do is we want to protect the what we call waters of Utah, which are part of waters of the U.S. So these are our big bodies of water. We want to keep them clean, and we all agree it's super important. But if we have a building lot, because that's our concern, and let's say our building lot, for whatever reason, over the years, the lots around it have been built up. It's in an old farm area, and we have one specifically that this happened with. It's in an old farm area, and as the other house is built, they raised their lots. So we have the last lot down a almost dirt road, but there's no storm drains, there's nothing there. It's just a lot, but that lot is several feet lower than any of the lots around it. It's almost like in a little pond. But the homeowner has decided not to lift it. They're still going to build in that. So in theory, all of the protections that you would put in place so that the stormwater, if it hit that lot, you want to make sure it doesn't run off and get in the storm drains. There's no storm drains for 3 miles. And all of the other property sits a foot or more above it. So the problem becomes then we go to the city, and the city still says, no, the state requires us to do this. The state says, oh no, the feds require this to do it. So the builder spends thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars, putting in measures to protect the stormwater from running off that property. It can't run off the property anyway. But we still go through and do it because that's the requirement. That's the paperwork. But there's a huge cost to doing that paperwork.
So when when I drive around and look at construction sites, they have this fencing stuff around them, and I've always wondered, does that fencing get reused? Like, do they take it from project to project? Because I'm always hearing about our landfills getting full, and I just look at all of that stuff, and I just curious, is that recycled, or does that just become a landfill problem?
So in theory, it could be recycled, and maybe should be recycled. In reality, because the cost of actually installing it, pulling it up, cleaning it, and reusing it, no, I've never seen it reused. So we'll have that fence put in, and we'll have miles of it put in.
Is it a product that degrades well in landfill, or is it like a plastic? I've never actually gone up and touched them. Are they like a plastic that just sits there forever?
Yeah, and I don't know exactly what it's made of. I believe it's some sort of a plastic, but by design, no, it doesn't degrade, because it's meant, how it works for everybody to understand is, and everybody's seen them, they're a darker color and they sit, I don't know, 2-3 feet up, but they also bury 6 inches into the ground. So they bury them in the ground so that when it rains, the water will flow down and hit that fence. And then that fence is an ultra fine filter that lets the water just seep through it ever so slowly. So that material is designed to be buried and wet for an extended period of time and not degrade.
Oh, okay.
So by design, no, when it goes to the landfill, it stays there for a very long time. So, which that's another one that becomes an issue is as you drive around and look at construction sites, and I'm sure you have, knowing what I explained, that this is for water to run down and come against it. So if we put that fence on the uphill side of a building lot, it obviously does zero good. But it's pretty expensive to put in. And then because it sits on little stakes, the wind comes up or kids run through it and it breaks it down. It's constantly having to get stood back up, and there's a never-ending maintenance problem with it, and an expense.
So historically, all the years I've been alive, the more expensive homes tend to be built upon the hills and where they have a view and the lots are a little more expensive versus starter homes, which tend to be down in the valley. So in reality, if we were to change that requirement for stormwater to be different on the lot based on where it sits, the starter home lots really don't generally require that level of stormwater, although they're being required right now. We could probably potentially maybe change that requirement and drop the price of those homes, build a smaller home, and make it so people could afford them. Is that a fair assumption, or?
No, I think that's exactly right. So the interesting thing is the way the federal requirements are written, the stormwater process, whatever you're going to do to protect that stormwater on the lot, you have to write a plan. So you have to sit down and design, here's what my water is coming on, here's how I'm going to control it, and you put into place practices that you're going to use a silt fence. Or a lot of times we'll use what they call a curb cut back. So on the downhill side, if it's running from the back of the lot to the front of the lot when it hits the sidewalk, you put like a little trench, so as that water hits, it will sit there and pool, let everything settle out before it runs out. Usually it will evaporate or percolate, sink down into the ground. The problem is again, because everybody's afraid of regulation, and mostly regulators afraid of the regulators above them, rather than let the person that's working on the lot build that plan and do exactly what you said and what the federal permit really outlines, instead they're stuck going, no, we have to hit this really high level and everybody's got to put a silt fence in and everybody's got to do this so that it looks like we have met the requirement.
I can understand that. I would be the same way. I would be like, I'm going to go do the max just to make sure I'm safe.
Right, because nobody wants to get the fines.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to have the regulator that is regulating them show up and say, this is done inappropriately, here we're going to fine you. Now again, interesting thing in the stormwater, by design, it's meant to say, well, here, I put in this particular process assuming it would deal with the water. It turns out when it actually rained, it didn't work. It didn't work the way I wanted, I have to change it. And that's okay. Then we change it and we improve it and we do a better job. But again, nobody allows for that change. It's something happens. It's been a few years ago, but we had kind of the tail ends of a hurricane that just because of the weather patterns came up through Utah and it hit really, really massive rainstorms in certain spots of Utah. When that happened, some of these measures to protect the water they failed. Now, to start with, it was water like we almost never see in Utah. Tons and tons of rain, really, really fast. Well, the builder that did that, who does a really good job and is really concerned about the water and how to set things up, a lot of his measures failed. The city actually pressed criminal charges against the guy who built the plan.
Why?
Even though they were out fixing it. Well, because they said you obviously didn't do good enough, and they were afraid that the state would come down and put some sort of penalty against them.
So the city didn't care? The city was worried about a fine they would get?
Well, I don't know that I can speak for the city. That's how it appeared to me. As I deal with the different cities and I see it, they're less concerned about the quality of the water, and they're more concerned about what will happen to them if they don't meet the requirements. Okay, so again, another example. A different city came in and they've got a river that comes through the city, and they were really, really worried about the water quality. So they went out and on their own expense, not required by the permit or anything else. They just says, no, we're worried about this. And they went and bought a bunch of equipment so they could measure the quality of the water. And they started checking where any water comes into the river, and further down the river, they set up specific strategic points to check the water quality. And they said, now we're going to implement these different things. And as they did, we're going to continue to check that water quality because we want a cleaner river. They did that. Their water quality improved noticeably, measurably. Then they had the state come out and check on them, and they still got in trouble with the state because even though their water quality had improved, they had focused too much attention on improving the water quality and not enough attention on doing the visual requirements that we could look at and go, oh, well, that's been put in place.
So now the city's being penalized by the state because the state decided there wasn't a checkbox?
Exactly right. Because when the state came out, the state says, yes, but according to our piece of paper, you should have put this in place, and you didn't. And the city's saying, yes, because we found that ineffective. Instead, we did this, and look, it improved the water.
So that has to be a really big frustration to the cities, because I do think we have a lot of elected people who do care about their cities and do want them to be a better place, but they're under the same problem as some of the builders in that when they focus on where they see there really could be improvement, they have agencies above them saying, no, you can't focus on that, you have to focus on what we want you to focus on. And so that could be a pretty big frustration to them as well.
Very big frustration. The cities struggle with the stormwater regulation probably as much, if not more, than the builders.
Yeah.
Because some of the hoops are required to jump through. Because remember, a lot of those also are held liable for all the dirt that gets in the road during the winter. When we deliberately put sand and salt on the road, they have to deal with sewers. They have a tough job to make that work. Sometimes the frustration of the builders is when it gets down to that lower level, and not the city leaders and not those hired, but that lower inspector level. And they bring them in a lot of cities it's kind of a revolving door. It's people that come in, they're not well trained. They get a little bit of training, enough to go, oh, here's what we do. And so then they show up on a job site and say, well, this isn't going the way I want, I'm going to shut it down, I'm going to give fines. And they're quick to give fines. And probably their heart's in the right spot, they're trying to do it. But more times than not, at that level, same as in my example on the city, they're not so much interested in whether or not this has any impact on the water. They're more interested in, well, this should be put in place. As I look at your site, I notice that it's not. So because of that, I need to give you a fine, or I need to shut your job down and send everybody home early. And so that becomes the frustration with the builders is, well, you're not, this has nothing to do with the quality of the water. It's, we will have a builder get fined because part of their plan says if you have a porta potty, you have to have a porta potty on site. Your porta potty has to be a certain distance away from a hard surface, the sidewalk, and it has to be staked down. So it's placed where it needs to be, it's put on a map, and it's all staked down and everything's right. But then the excavator shows up and he needs to dig a trench to put the power line from the house out to the road. And in order to do that, he needs to move that porta potty because it goes right where it is. So he moves it to where it's got to go. But he's not familiar with all the requirements, nor is it his chief concern. So he forgets to stake it down. it's still in a good spot, it's still not threatening anything, then the stormwater inspector shows up and says, no, we have a big problem because that hasn't been staked down. That becomes the problem. So we're more concerned with the paperwork. We're more concerned with those visual, measurable, check the box than we are, did that harm the water or could it harm the water? Or can we just go, wow, you've missed it, let's stake it down? And there's always that assumption that the builder is deliberately doing something that would be harmful to the water. And they're not.
So if something like that happens and now the builder's slapped with a fine, who pays for that fine? Do I pay for it as the purchaser of that home? Or does the builder pay for it? Or does the excavator pay for it? Who covers the fee of that fine?
So regardless who covers the fee, it always ends up being you. So let's say the excavator pays for it because the builder goes to him and say, look, this was your mistake. We just got $1,000 fine. I'm going to charge that. I'm going to take that out of the money I owe you. Well, the excavator is just going to raise his price. He can't work for free. He has to buy his fuel. He has to pay his employees. Same with the builder. If they say, okay, well, we got this fine, they can't say, well, I'm going to build this house for you, but I can't work Saturdays because I'm going to get a side job so I have enough money to cover the fines I got. They're going to say, your house just became $1,000 more expensive. And keep in mind, on this stormwater, it's very real expenses. So with a big custom home, and again, these are big custom homes, sit on bigger lots. I've had builders, and actually bring me the receipts because I didn't trust their numbers. They will spend over $30,000 to put together this stormwater plan and manage the stormwater on that house. And sometimes there's never enough rainfall in Utah to trigger the need for all the things they put in place.
Well,
So it's wasted money.
wouldn't it make sense to have different requirements based off where you are in Utah? Because there's spots in Utah that get more water and spots in Utah that get less water, as well as seasonal. Because I would imagine you would need higher precautions in winter and spring than in July. July we get no water ever.
So there is a part of the permit that allows for, if you say, okay, I'm in an area that's not going to get any rain, I don't have to comply with this. The problem is they make the areas really narrow and the window really, really short. So for the most part, I don't know of anybody that really uses that. Again, it would make sense that we can have periods of time that are weeks, if not months, that there will be no rain, and we can pretty much count on that in certain areas. We could easily build a house start to finish and be out of there. But again, the regulators are more concerned with checking the box. Did you get your permit? Did you get all of your things in place? And are you doing your weekly inspections? That's more important than did we actually do something that harms the water. So these are things that one of the many things that continues to add cost to the homes that we have to look at and go, does this make sense? Are we making the right choice? Again, nobody wants dirty water, especially the builders don't want dirty water. Builders are never going to be able to sell a house in an area where the streams are dirty and the water's contaminated. Makes no sense for them. More than anybody, they want clean water. But we have to find a reasonable way to do it, and something that has an expense at least considered into it.
Well, I think we also need to create a situation where the cities can focus on the areas they would like to focus on, improving water quality or whatever that is, without a big brother looking down on them, forcing them to not focus on what's important, but to focus on what they think they should focus on. So the cities can do what's in the best interest of the city. Sounds like their hands are tied as well.
No, and that's true. And this last year, unfortunately, the only real effective way to combat regulation is with a different regulation, which seems counterproductive, and I would argue is counterproductive. But this past year, there was a bill ran trying to get at that, trying to say, well, let's figure out how to make this make more sense. How can we make the inspections more effective, more efficient? How can we have less time of people just driving around to get from place to place? And we worked really hard to figure that out. Unfortunately, it didn't get the attention it should have throughout the summer, so it didn't get worked on until we got into the legislative session. And the state's Division of Environmental Quality didn't like the language, so they pushed back really hard on it. And the League of Cities and Towns were also not real comfortable with it. They're like, no, we have to be careful. And for good reason, because they're going, ultimately, we're going to be responsible for this. If this proposed change leaves us vulnerable for citations, we have a problem with that. So the language worked through a really long, difficult process. It was written and rewritten more than half a dozen times. And we ended up with a bill that I believe does add some efficiencies. It's going to help, but it's kind of messy. There's some problems with it. So they have put it on what they call the interim committee study list this year. So it will be reviewed throughout the summer with the legislators kind of looking over it and trying to bring in all the stakeholders and saying, okay, how do we get it right? We're moving this direction. Both the cities and the state are going to have to find a way to work on this to say, okay, well, there are certain things we've done in the past we're not going to be able to do anymore. But hopefully we will get through that as the summer moves on, and we'll have language that's more effective come next year, so we don't have quite so much expense attached to stormwater paperwork. And we can focus on stormwater. If there's a problem, we should deal with it. If there's not, we shouldn't invent one and have regulation for regulation's sake. So I think we're about out of time for today. Again, thank you two for talking with me about this. And again, as always, we believe everyone deserves a home. Let's remove the barriers.